in my community, having a disability or being deaf, it's sort of seen as taboo. I know I mentioned it earlier. It is seen as taboo.
Hi, welcome to episode 2 of Questions from the Closet podcast. I'm your host, Cameron Wagg, and today I have a very special guest, Hannah. Hannah, please could you tell me a bit about yourself and why I asked you to come on today?
Hi, my name is Hannah. I'm a BSL tutor. I work primarily at Solihull College teaching level 1 BSL, and I also volunteer at a deaf charity, so BSL Silver. We're a community interest company and we deliver free courses to the local communities. And Cam has asked me to speak about my experiences through teaching and a little bit more about why we deliver and what we teach, pretty much.
So, before we begin the interview, could I just ask where you're calling in from?
So I'm calling in from Great Bar. We're based in that area and our classes run in Sutton Coldfield. So we're looking to expand, but currently BSL Silver is situated in Sutton Coldfield and we also teach at Solihull College.
So, Hannah, are you deaf yourself?
And no, I am hearing.
Thank you. So, could you give me a bit of timeline with your own experience learning British Sign Language and then when you started delivering these lessons?
Yeah, of course. So I think I started around 2023, towards the end of the year, so around November time. And I was actually a student myself at Solihull College. My teacher was Shakila, so this is Silver. We all have our own sign name, so we have something that's sort of our own characteristic that the deaf community gives us, so they can recognize us. Just like there's two Hannahs in a classroom. So my sign name is Law, that was given to me by the deaf community. When I first started, I was doing my A levels, so I did law, psychology, and sociology, so it just stuck. But I had to stop. So I started uni, so it got a little bit too much for me, and I started seriously in 2023 while I was doing my degree, which I was studying criminology, policing, and investigation. So after I started studying, I did my level 1 and 2, and whilst I was studying those, I was also volunteering at the deaf charity I work at now. And I was also volunteering at Solihull College too. So it was a bit on hand. It was quite full on. And afterwards, I started teaching at Solihull College as a part-time tutor this year, which I've just done my fourth year for my first time. It was very, very interesting. And hopefully in September, I'll be starting my second again.
Amazing. So, just to go back, could you explain the difference between level 1 and 2? How many levels are there?
So it goes up to level 6. So level 6 is usually as a qualified interpreter, you will need to have your level 6. It's very, very serious. It's very hard. So I have done up to my level 3. It's very the difference really is with level 1 and 2, you're learning about content. We start with deaf awareness, learning about what is deaf culture, how to sign. We learn basic vocab. Level 2, we start learning different techniques. There's pretty much shortcuts on how we can sign rather than having to sign full sentences. We can do it a lot quicker. We start to pick up the pace. And level 3, we end up presenting. So you go out, find a topic, research it yourself, and you have to learn how to present yourself in front of a class and in front of groups. And we do all of that. And I myself haven't done my level 6, but maybe in the future it would be interesting to
Have
see
you
if I can
got
go.
have you got any ideas of what topic you'd pick?
Well, to be honest, because I studied in my degree policing, even in my dissertation, I focused on the deaf community, how we can improve relationships with the deaf community and the police. So I think if I was to do a research piece, it would be pretty much along the same lines.
So, with the names that get picked, is that something given by the deaf community? Does it have to be by sort of people who are deaf?
So it's a bit of both, really. So for example, if I didn't know anybody in class, usually what our teachers would tell us is, okay, pick a signing for yourself, something you think will really get your peers to understand how you are as a person. So there's a whole range that you can have. It can be pretty much anything, as long as there's some way to sign it. We can figure it out, and that you pick yourself. But sometimes the deaf community will give you one instead. For example, I've had some students, they started with the name, for example, Snowflake or there was Rainbow, and then the deaf community, once they met them, they thought, actually, well, no, I think you're quite cheeky. I like the name Cheeky for you. Or I think you're happy, or you're always wearing purple. I like the color purple on you. I think that's your new name. So it's whatever really sticks for them as well, that will also come into play. And then it's up to you whether or not you want to change it. But it is influenced by the deaf community a lot, pretty much.
Amazing. So, why did you start to learn BSL?
Well, I have a brother who's half deaf, and to be honest, I never really thought about learning BSL because he could communicate anywhere. I thought, yeah, I knew basics like the alphabet, just basic signs. So growing up, I never really felt, oh, that's something I would be into. I've always loved learning other languages like Japanese, Korean, all of this stuff. But then I never really thought about BSL. It's very visual. It's completely different on how you would start to learn. And then one of the days I was in the middle of my course for university, and I thought, God, I need a place where I can study, where it's quiet. I can't study at home. And I decided to jump into one of the BSL classes that Silver was teaching, and I would just sit in the back with my little laptop doing all my work. And I noticed the classroom, everybody had such a good relationship with each other. They were all very jolly. It was a really nice environment. And I started thinking, well, actually, I want to be a part of that. It looks like I could like pick up little things that were going on around me. I could hear the context of their subjects and stuff. I was really interested afterwards, and I was thinking, I want to be a part of what they're doing. It seems like such a jolly community with what's going on in the class. So I started, I think, 3 months late after the course had started from the beginning, but I caught up in no time. It was pretty good.
Was it difficult?
To be honest, I think because I already had some experience of the basics and everything, it was a little bit easier for me than a completely new student who had never experienced it. But it was difficult grasping some concepts or some vocabulary that I'd missed out on. But my peers around me were so patient. I would ask a million different questions. Even some things now I look back, I think, how did I not know that? But everybody was so patient and so welcoming. So I picked it up really quickly.
Amazing. So, could you tell me a bit about the charity BSL Silver? Because you've mentioned Silver a few times. I know you work for this charity, so I'd love to hear more.
Perfect. So BSL Silver, it's a community interest company. Right now, we're trying to establish it as a charity by itself now. So it started around 2022. Silver is Shakila. She had quite an interesting backstory that I can explain to you just quickly. So Silver came from a background where hunger was a companion she didn't grow up with the best things in life. She struggled a little bit growing up. She wasn't from a wealthy background, and she thought to herself she needed to do something with herself. She didn't do great in school, that she'd be escorted in the back of a police car, because back in those days they used to, if you missed school, that's how you were going to get there. So what happened eventually was she settled down, had kids, got married, but she didn't realize that my brother was deaf. He was half deaf. And she thought, oh God, how did I miss this? How could I not have known?
So, just to be
And
clear, Silver is your mother.
yes, it was my mother, if I haven't mentioned that yet. Um, and she mentioned that my brother, he had been lip reading. So even though he was half deaf, he was reading everybody's lips to try and understand what was going on around him. So having no qualifications, she had just jobs here and there. She thought to herself she wanted to do something about it and make sure that she would be able to teach my brother eventually later on. So she went out and she got her qualifications in BSL. She studied it, and now she's been a teacher for over 17 years. She's been working with the deaf community, and she's been in all sorts of different positions, from a volunteer to a part-time tutor, an interpreter. There's lots of different things that she's been involved in. But what we all found eventually was that the BSL community, it's very expensive, and we believe that there shouldn't be barriers in between the deaf and the hearing community. A lot of the time it's as if deaf people have to pay for their own language, which we did not agree with. So Silver decided that she was going to start BSL Silver to offer free lessons to all communities. Anybody is welcome, deaf, hearing, anybody can come, and we teach them BSL to try and break down those barriers. Um, and we've been running since 2022, so it's been quite a while. We've had lots and lots of different opportunities to teach Lord Mayors and visit different places where we can help volunteer and just deliver basic deaf awareness courses, and it's been really great. It's a great opportunity to have as well.
Amazing, thank you. It's really impressive to see the work that sort of stemmed from one person, especially because that kind of came from hardship, like you said. I think, yeah, it's really nice that someone decided to start putting some work in and making an effort for this community that not a lot of people do. And that kind of leads to the next question is, do you think more people should be learning BSL?
I definitely, yes. I think that it's a language I kind of think everybody should have basic knowledge of, because it's not as though, yes, some people are born deaf and or their hearing deteriorates later on, but anybody can be deaf. It can happen to anybody at any point in your life. And I think once you actually experience it, you don't really understand how isolating it can be for the deaf community. A lot of the time they miss out on opportunities, or they don't feel as though anybody can really communicate. And I think even if you see a deaf person and you can say the basics, hello, how are you? It really makes it, you can see in their face they're lit up with joy. It's a skill that I think really opens your mind and your perspective to different communities that are around you, not only the deaf community, but there's lots of other people that have different disabilities and they can use signing to communicate, and it's really handy, it's really useful.
Amazing, thank you. So, what do you find the most rewarding part of your work?
To be honest, I think just when I was a volunteer, I think just being able to help students learn at the time, because I was a volunteer at the college, being able to help them when they're struggling, seeing their relief when they finally understand it was really nice. I think now as a tutor in my own class, because I teach primarily adults, a lot of them have, for example, things going on at home or struggles that they have that they don't know who to talk to, who to go for help to. I think it's really rewarding when you see them sort of leave that stress at home and they're in a positive environment. And at the end of the year, you can see how much they've progressed. As a tutor, I'm always telling them, you don't know how much you've come from the beginning unless you're filming yourself from the beginning and filming yourself now and compare those two videos. You won't be able to see, but I can tell you as your tutor, you've done really well. And I find that across the board, students always doubt themselves. And I think it's natural as a part of life. You're going to think, oh, I haven't done great here. I'm not sure if I did that right or wrong. But I think being able to give them some positive reinforcement and telling them that they're doing well, you see it in their face. It's just really nice. It's very rewarding for myself. I can see how they light up a little bit.
Amazing, thank you. What are some misconceptions that the wider public have about deaf people that you've picked up on?
So there's quite a lot, to be honest. I think one of the first things I've noticed when we did our deaf awareness was a lot of people using the term deaf and dumb, which we shouldn't be using at all, because what you'll find is they're not dumb. Like there's nothing wrong with deaf people to be referring to them in that way. I think it's quite insulting.
So it's a
Um,
derogatory term.
Definitely, it's very derogatory, it's very demeaning, and there's some deaf people, they're the most intelligent people I've ever met. As long as you can communicate with them, you'll find out yourself. And again, there's lots of different ways to communicate. You don't just need BSL. For example, if they have English proficiency, you can write something down, they can communicate like that. You can point at things, you have images. Nowadays with technology, it's so easy to get around these barriers, but you'll find that a lot of people don't really bother. um as well as that, when I was doing my dissertation, I looked at the relationship between police and deaf people, and we found that when you communicate with deaf people, sometimes they vocalize and they can't hear themselves, but they're vocalizing some noise, or they're trying to have some sort of sound coming out. And they get called aggressive for it. And I don't think that's really the case. I think it's you just have to understand they can't hear themselves. They don't know, if even if they know they're doing that, if they have some hearing and they can hear it, it's not to be aggressive. It's just it's nothing really to take personal or be afraid of in some sense. You'll be surprised when you hear the experiences of this community. A lot of the time they get really taken advantage of or really spoken to or ignored or pushed aside. It's really shocking.
It's almost difficult to hear about how people will just take advantage of those who are more vulnerable.
Yeah, definitely. If you go to the shops, for example, Silver was in a takeaway shop, and there was a deaf person standing right at the front of the queue, and he was pointing to what he wanted, and the staff were completely ignoring him because they didn't know how to communicate. Even though he was pointing, they just didn't want to communicate with him. And there were members of the queue behind him just pushing in front, pushing him to the side. And it was really shocking. So, because we're able to step in and interpret for him, it made it a little bit easier. But we just thought to ourselves, imagine there was someone that couldn't help, then what would happen? You can't ignore people like that. It's just horrible.
Yeah, like you said, what about all the scenarios where there isn't someone who understands sign language there? I think
Exactly.
how do you think we can be more inclusive? Because there are clearly barriers. How should we be breaking them down?
Well, I think for starters, it's really important to acknowledge that deaf people can exist anywhere. I think once I started learning BSL, I noticed how many people had hearing aids. And even though my own brother has them, I never really thought about it too much until I started learning it. And I think, first of all, educating yourself on the right ways to approach deaf people, different methods of communication are really, really positive ways. Even if you, for example, if we're talking about doctors or in the police, something like that, even if you have apps that you can use to guide you on to communicate or different places where you can refer deaf people that they can access an interpreter, or even yourself if you go and try and learn a few signs, even just basic signs, it just really opens up more doors and it allows more positive interactions and it makes the deaf people feel a bit more welcome.
So you think it is learning to at least have a basis understanding of communication?
Yeah, even if it's not you communicating yourself, even if you're aware of just the different methods of communication, so you don't think that all doors are shut when you come in contact with a deaf person. So in the future, if you did meet a deaf person and you don't know BSL, don't panic. There's a lot of ways to communicate. There's a lot of ways around it.
Turning to yourself, could you tell me a bit about your own sort of cultural background, if you're comfortable sharing, and how that has affected your teaching?
Yeah, of course. So I come from a British Pakistani background. My family is also Muslim, so I come from that background as well. In terms of teaching, culturally, when I've spoken to other students, I think I was blessed to have my mum who had a deep understanding of deaf culture and deaf awareness, because sometimes in the Asian community, it sort of can be a taboo if you have a deaf child or a child with a disability. It's sort of seen as something that's not really easy to figure out or figure out how to communicate with them, how to help them. There's not a lot of major understanding on how to not deal but go cope, if that makes sense. Um, so a lot of the times it can be a little bit tricky for those communities, and I have had a lot of people tell me who have come from Asian backgrounds or different backgrounds that their families just don't really bother with them because of their disabilities. So I think it didn't affect me personally myself because of the family dynamic I have, but I think it has affected a lot of other students. But for my own teaching, we like to keep things very inclusive. We like to make people feel welcome. Doesn't matter what background, your culture, your religion, your beliefs, as long as you come in and we can respect each other, we have a positive environment and we're all there to learn a language. On top of that, we do, as I was talking about earlier, sign names. They aren't gender specific, so they're sort of any person can be called anything. So it's sort of to be more respectful as well and keep inclusivity at the forefront. So, for example, if you prefer to use certain pronouns when we're signing, you can pick any name you want. And furthermore, when we're using pronouns with signing, it's not as though you're using a female pronoun versus a male pronoun. You can sort of just refer by pointing and then you use your lip pattern. Also, when you're communicating with the deaf, community. Um, because sort of deaf people are sort of the last people to find out about anything unless they go and physically research themselves or they are told specifically. It can be really hard for them to get access to different types of information. So sometimes when we're covering topics, it can be a little bit difficult to sort of explain some sort of subjects. So just like anybody who might not have a good understanding of one subject versus another, it can be the same with the deaf community. For example, one of my co-workers was telling me when I was around 20 years old, he's profoundly deaf. He's from Eritrea, so that's close to Ethiopia, I think. But
Thank you.
he immigrated here, and he was telling me he was adamant that I need to have kids at the age of 20, and he was saying, "No, you're wasting your life away. You need to have children." So I said to him, "Well, do you know about, the processes that their bodies go through, your hormonal changes?" But he wasn't aware, and he just said it's not something that he's ever been told about. He didn't know anything to do with it. He didn't even know that was a thing. So
Oh,
certain
wow.
concepts and certain subjects, you do have to just be patient, take your time to explain, and never take it personally unless they're telling you directly, "I don't like you" or something like that. Don't take these things personally. I think it's really easy to misinterpret them as being aggressive or rude when that's really not the case.
Why do you think that deaf people are the last to find things out?
Well, for example, just say if there was a fire alarm going off, they're not going to hear it unless you see a
Right.
light flashing with the alarm. They need to have that. If there's a group of people talking and there's not somebody that's communicating with them, or just sort of forgets that they're deaf and they're just standing there, they're not going to find out either. A lot of the time, we tell our students if you're speaking or you're with a deaf person and you're talking on behalf of them, it's really important that you don't share their personal or private information, just how you wouldn't want somebody to do the same about you, just because they won't be able to hear it and they can't stop it unless you're signing. So a lot of the times they aren't aware of what's going on unless somebody has communicated it to them. Bear in mind, some of our students don't have English proficiency. They can't understand English. They've come from different countries. There's lots of different ways to sign. And what you'll find is not everybody follows standard BSL. Even in BSL itself, based off of different counties, there can be, just like how we have different accents, you can have different types of signs. But people that come from different countries, sometimes they don't have English proficiency. They might use their own signs they've just made up to cope with. So if you can't
Yeah.
communicate with
Okay.
them, they won't be able to understand other people as well, maybe.
So, if, from your experience, how do the deaf community and then British Pakistani or Muslim communities, how did they intersect with each other? From your lived experience with your family, how has that been?
Well, I found that a lot of, not necessarily just to my culture, but I found after signing, I understood that a lot of people suffered with hearing loss, and actually needed to learn BSL, but they couldn't bring themselves to do it because they were sort of ashamed about it. Specifically in while I was growing up and in my community, having a disability or being deaf, it's sort of seen as taboo. I know I mentioned it earlier, it is seen as taboo, and a lot of people are sort of not ashamed, but they don't know how to communicate it, and they don't with these deaf communities, and they don't really want to tackle it. They just It's not something that's really spoken about often, and I think whilst I'm lucky that I had Silver because she was on it straight away, even explaining to our communities, "Oh, I teach BSL," they don't really understand um, if it has an impact, what type of job that is. I know it's a bit stereotypical, but a lot of the times we are sort of pushed to go for jobs like being in a high paid job where you're a doctor, a lawyer, something that's considered to have more respect than just being a BSL tutor. But I think being in this job, I've had so much respect from adults and even children, and it's really hard to make the communities really understand that it's not about money, it's about giving people opportunities to actually have access to their own language and being able to communicate.
Thank you so much. Hannah, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you and get some real insight into the deaf community. The last question I had was, given this interview, what would my sign name be?
Well, I think based off of your lovely bookshelf that you've got behind you, I'm sort of gathering that you like reading and writing. So I think the something to do with that. So I think if you had book, if you had reading, I think that would really suit you. I think you've
Book.
done it's very nice.
I love book. I would love to be book. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much. It's been really nice talking to you.
Before you go, the last thing, is there anything you wanted to plug?
So we have our Facebook page, BSL Silver CIC, and we post videos on there for people who aren't able to attend our classes. We've got lots and lots of different videos signing, and there's also subtitles on them. So if you don't understand the signs, you can follow along with those. And yeah,
Amazing.
if you have a look, we have our website too, and we're constantly posting different online classes that are available as well. So if you're interested in joining, let us know, and we can get your name down for September.